Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
So a very warm welcome to everyone joining us on this edition of Soft Cover. Once again, we have someone very special with a very special book about a brand that has become a cult following, especially here in India, among the tech and smartphone lovers. We're talking about Xiaomi, and the author is JPK. His real name is Jayadevan P.K. But as we speak, JPK, because you like to be called JPK, welcome to the Soft Cover, this edition.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we have this tradition of unwrapping your book, unwrapping the book. So that's what I'm going to do now. And I guess you have to do the honors of applause.
Yes.
One minute, I'm not done yet. Okay. You've done a really good job of wrapping. Okay. Ta-da.
Yeah.
So the name of the book is Xiaomi, How a Startup Disrupted the Market and Created a Cult Following. The author, as we said, is Jayadevan JPK. Although his friends and everyone else calls him JPK. JPK has been a tech journalist and a business journalist for over a decade, and then he went on to co-found Factor Daily, one of my really, really, truly a favorite news site of mine when it comes to technology and telling stories about tech in a very humanistic, realistic way. And I love the stories that Factor Daily does. Thank you for starting that site. And also he's an evangelist with Freshworks. I hope I've covered everything, JPK.
Yeah, that pretty much covers it.
Right. Okay, so let me get down to some of the questions. I have like a list here. One of my first questions was, why focus on Xiaomi? Do you have an affinity towards Xiaomi? Do you have an affinity towards the value for money brands out there? Why Xiaomi?
So it started a while ago when I was a journalist with the Indian Express, with the new Indian Express down south in Bangalore. And so, as you know, journalists were paid, peanuts, right? Like I used to have a feature phone, and then I graduated into a smartphone, which is like a Micromax phone, and then after some time, I was looking for a better phone, but of course, I couldn't afford one of those flagship devices. So I started looking for a good alternative. So one of those days I was invited to, and I was working with the Economic Times at that time. So I was invited to the office of Flipkart, the e-commerce company, which was doing really well then. This was, I think, back in 2010, 12-ish. Mm-hmm. And they said, hey, there's this new phone which has come out and it's selling out like hotcakes. It's selling out like in every 4 seconds, every 5 seconds, they're selling tens of thousands of devices. So I was like, I need to see how they're doing it, what's happening in the back end, how are the engineers pulling through and all of that. And I went and saw it and I was mind blown. Like, sometimes the folks at Flipkart would think that the website is glitching, but it was actually being sold. So millions of Indians were literally queuing up to buy this phone. So obviously something was happening, and I realized that so I went back. I also participated in the flash sale. On Flipkart, I bought a phone, and when I got the phone, I realized this was really good in terms of the features that it offered and the price point at which it was selling. I think it was a credible alternative. It was, in fact, it was an incredible alternative at that point because all the other devices were expensive but didn't have as many features. So I thought, this is an interesting company to keep a tab on. As a tech journalist, I used to cover a bunch of companies. As we started tracking Chinese companies, there were a lot of Chinese companies which came into India. So you had Paytm raising funds from Alibaba, you had Tencent coming back, a lot of Indian companies. And then you had these phone device companies like Xiaomi and all that come into India. It practically cleaned up the market, and all the Indian companies lost out big time. So you didn't have, within a span of few months, Micromax, Lava, Carbon, all of these guys who used to sell like millions of devices were non-existent. So then the race was between a couple of Chinese companies, which is Xiaomi, and then Oppo, Vivo, Realme, and that a set of those companies. And then you had Samsung and iPhone, which is like a very premium phone. So I realized this company is growing like really fast. And recently I was checking online and I saw that Xiaomi is now the world's third largest company. So obvious largest smartphone company. So there's Apple, there's Samsung, there's Apple, and then there's Xiaomi. So if you look at Apple was founded in 1970s, and Samsung was founded in 1930s. These companies have a long legacy, a huge amount of R&D and all of that in the business, right? And Xiaomi is like a 10-year-old company. So obviously they're doing something good. So as a business journalist, it was interesting for me to find out what is the DNA, what makes this company successful. And that's how I started writing the book. And, it became a serious pursuit last year when we were all locked down and, kind of figuring out what to do with that extra time we had. So, and that's how the book happened.
And you know what? I can actually be a witness to how great the phone quality is, because I have a phone that, I don't know if I should say this, but then it's in that the budget category, and I've been using it since 2018, and the features are great, and the phone still works. So yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So interestingly, this kind of a similar trend played out in China in the last decade, which was there were a lot of young people like you, me, and all of us, like who were graduating from sort of feature phones to smartphones. China also had this whole economic miracle happening where it pulled out some 300 million people out of poverty and they moved them into middle income groups. So now, they had this desire to buy expensive, luxurious products, good looking products, well designed, credible alternatives. And at that point, China didn't have great alternatives, because then you had Nokia and Motorola, etc., selling very Americanish feature phones, and was priced out of the market in that sense. So you had this company come in and suddenly take the market. So that's where Xiaomi hit a very sweet spot. In the sense, if you look at think about it like IKEA, right? Like when somebody new moves into an apartment, it's your first home and you want to furnish it. You want to buy good, affordable, credible alternatives. You don't want to buy like the whole Shivajinagar market kind of stuff, because it doesn't last, very poor on quality. You don't have the money to go and buy Erman Miller and all of that. So you would look for a very nice credible alternative, and that's what Xiaomi offered to people like me, like who were looking for that.
JPK, you know what? I'm just gonna call you PK because that seems better.
Okay, fair enough.
So I was going through your book. You estimate the number of MIUI users, I think globally, at about 343.5 million users. So around how many of that would be in India? Would you have an estimate?
So I'm not very sure, but it would be close to about 100 million. And the interesting bit about that is Xiaomi doesn't call itself a smartphone company, and which is why the number about Xiaomi's number of users on MIUI is important. It considered itself as an internet company, so its economics are sort of founded on being an internet company and not a smartphone company. Now let me explain what the difference is. So a smartphone company would try to profit from the margins it gets by selling the phone. So it's a hardware business. You try and cram in a lot of features and then you try and make money off of that. Whereas an internet business wants to make money not off of the hardware but off of the services it provides. Like for example, advertisements or credits. You could roll out credits to your users. You could have gaming. You could have music service and all of that. So internet company looks at them as users and not smartphone buyers. So which is where the genius of Xiaomi's business model lies, right? Like so you're not competing with traditional hardware companies, because if you are, then you're probably at a disadvantage when you're going up against Samsung and all the others. Here you've already said, I don't want margins from hardware. I only want 5% margins from selling my phones, which means and it's called honest pricing, and that really appeals to folks like me, like, who are looking for things that are not overpriced, right? Like, Xiaomi calls it honestly priced. So they said we'll only take 5% of margins from our hardware business, from our internet services business. So the difference here is, again, if you're an internet company, if you're, let's say, if you have an app and you want more people to use it, you have to spend on advertising for people to download it and use it, right? Like, it's called the customer acquisition cost. Now, in our case, in Xiaomi's case, what's happening is people are buying the product and becoming users. So instead of Xiaomi spending to acquire users, Xiaomi is actually getting paid to acquire new users. So this is how you flip the whole model around, saying, hey, I'm an internet company, not a hardware company. So I thought that was a nice, sort of very interesting strategic call that the company made. It has its origins in the founders, sort of background. Lei Jun, who was an internet entrepreneur, and then later sort of a angel investor, and he saw the rise of internet in China, and then he was quick to spot that markets like India, Eastern Europe, and all of these markets are quickly growing and have millions of users. Let's get them, even if we are selling the hardware for affordable prices. So Xiaomi would sell you a phone, Xiaomi would sell you a pen, Xiaomi would sell you a like household devices, etc. The only goal is to get you into the Xiaomi ecosystem, and then sort of so they would land you, and then they would expand the whole business with you, kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, that way it's a very interesting company.
Yeah, got it. So, and you also say that Xiaomi became a Fortune 500 company in less than 10 years, in about 9 years. That's a massive feat. How much do you think the Indian user base would have helped Xiaomi get to that place so quickly?
So all of Xiaomi's new user growth came from India. Like, India is already $5-6 billion dollar market for Xiaomi. So they sell hundreds of millions of phones. I think it's in the order of last year they had maybe 25,000 crores worth of business coming from India. So all of its new growth came from India. It's a huge number.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, like the entire book, it's about the great business strategies that Xiaomi followed to become a success. To you, what were some of your favorite things, or things that really impressed you about Xiaomi's strategies? Would it be the part where they convert fans into employees? Would it be the flash sales? What is it?
So it's a combination of all of this, which is, you have, so one is your honest pricing, which is a core part of, how Xiaomi sells more devices. But more than that, it's also about fans. It's huge. The whole company is built on top of fans. Like, until a company like Xiaomi came along, you had, device makers make phones or, let's say television sets, etc. And they would look at it from a top-down approach. So we've made this device, which is amazing, and then we'll advertise it. We'll have celebrities backing it, and then we'll sell it. But what's happened with the rise of internet and social media, etc., is advertising doesn't really work in the traditional way it used to work. So people care more about what their peers are saying, what other people or influencers are saying online, rather than what the brand itself is trying to say. So even if you pay a celebrity like $1 million and say, hey, Hugh Jackman eating panpara gutka, right? Like, it doesn't really work for me, because, I know that, Hugh Jackman is not eating panpara gutka. So advertising has lost its, old ways of working. This whole shift is happening. So which is where Xiaomi identified that, let me get my fans to be my, ambassadors. Let me get them to become influencers. Let me use the, millions of these guys to go out there and sell my devices. And it did this very beautifully. So this is one big reason why Xiaomi succeeded. The other reasons are, of course, China's ambitions to become global. It had a good manufacturing base. So all the technologies that we're using in telecom are commoditized these days, and of course, you don't have too much of a stringent patent rules, etc., applying in China or India and all of these countries. So all of these, there were a lot of these factors which came together. But I would say number one is fans, how Xiaomi used its fan base, and they've been gone about it very deliberately. how do you, so they would segment their fans into different sections. The top layer of fans would actually co-create the product, and the bottom layer of the fans would be like your army, like, they would go out there and fight battles for you on social media. If somebody is trashing your band, a brand, these guys would go and back your, back Xiaomi for, being a great company and all of that.
Are
So
these paid fans, JPK?
They're not typically paid. What's happened is, the trend is really that people want to participate in what they're consuming. Like, for example, these days you don't want to buy generic coffee, like, you want to buy coffee which has a story, which is maybe sustainably, procured and sold, and it helps livelihoods of, coffee growers and all of that, right? Like, so you're not just buying coffee, you're trying to participate in the brand's growth and, the whole story. And that's one way consumers have changed in their attitude. So if you and this is why Xiaomi fans are, very sort of unique in the sense. So Xiaomi began as an operating system company, and so it would say, hey, we have a bulletin board, why don't you upvote or downvote features that you want on the operating system. And these fans would go and say, hey, I want this feature, I want this feature, blah blah blah, and other fans would vote on it. And all of these votes would aggregate into, like, say there are top 3 features that need to be built. So Xiaomi would go back immediately, and within a week or two they would ship that feature. So fans would get a sense of key, this company is really listening, and they are building the product for me. So then I have a reason to be really closely associated with Xiaomi, thinking that, hey, I played a part in creating this whole piece in that sense. So that's how it built the fan base. Obviously it helps that, Xiaomi had China was going through the whole social media growth in the 2010 to 2020, like, millions of people joined social media. So WeChat and all of these platforms really grew. So all of this worked in favor of Xiaomi. Paid, from what I've seen, Xiaomi doesn't pay, reviewers or fans, as far as I've seen. And it's a great thing, right? Like, if your fans are ready to sort of back your brand without being paid. But they do have other things, like, you would have, let's say, you would have Xiaomi events, right? Gala, like huge events where you would bring like people from across the country together, and you'll have like thousands of Xiaomi fans who are also influencers streaming, the event, so that's like a whole fan culture. It's a bit of a frenzy, right? So that happens. You would have, tiny goodies, right? Like, limited edition.
Do they give out free phones and stuff like that?
They used to, they would have given out like small devices, like, let's say one of the fitness trackers, or the soft toys and the plushies and all of that. But I think that's not the like, you would do that with any event, right? Like, you walk into a Google event, or you walk into a any pretty much all launches, all the fans get like a small goodie bag, and it's that kind. But this Xiaomi would always put some price to it, just to test, whether this thing, people would actually pay for it. So there have been instances where in the early days Xiaomi founders would sort of take pictures of them sitting together in some kind of a nice setting, and there'll be some artifact in that picture which they would sell later, like, as a limited edition, kind of thing. And then you would have, like, again, all these fans jump in and say, hey, I want a piece of that, I want one of those things. So Xiaomi's always tried to like sell it, which is also a sign of very prudent sort of company building, not discounting or selling it in that sense, right? Like, not giving away too many freebies. So yeah, fans are mostly organic.
That's impressive. And now moving on, you call Manu Kumar Jain, the MD of Xiaomi India and also a global VP for Xiaomi, the man from merit. That's how you introduce. And you also say that Manu Kumar Jain helped Xiaomi with kind of building inroads and ingratiating itself with the BJP government and helping the BJP government realize its vision of Make in India. How much do you think that would have helped them kind of repair their reputation when there were claims that the Xiaomi phones were collecting data and sending it back to Beijing. This was back in 2014. I'll come to Galwan.
Yeah. So this is an interesting sort of thing to observe when it comes to, especially as as we see technology and technology companies are becoming more and more political, right? Like especially with data and all of this privacy, cross-border transactions, and all of that. Now, in the case of Xiaomi, India and China have had poor relationships, on and off. So you would have some flare up in the border and all of that. And to be able to safeguard the business from, at least to a large extent, from being affected by that. So what do I mean by this? Like, for example, Xiaomi last year sold, pretty much, if you take out the COVID, numbers and all of that, it did pretty well. It's still number one or two, in India and all of that. So the impact of the whole India China this thing was least felt on a brand like Xiaomi, although the company was scared. The company was like, that it would impact. You will see that something that they did very interesting right at the beginning, what you mentioned, right? Like they sort of worked very closely with the government in the Make in India program. So Xiaomi was one of the first to take advantage of the production linked incentives, which BJP government had said, right? Like, if you make products in India, you will get, tax rebates. It's a simple give and take. So Xiaomi started doing more and more of that. And what happened is, in the process, it also created jobs. In the process, it also set up big factories, in, Sri City and all of these guys. In the process, it also brought bigger ecosystem players like Foxconn and all of these guys to India. So the whole manufacturing base was set up, like and not just Xiaomi, but Xiaomi started it. And because Xiaomi started it, there were others who were willing to take that bet, and that actually proved to be a very good proof point for the BJP government. I think it would have happened if it was the Congress government also, like if it was any other government. This was a very smart move, like in terms of trying to safeguard your business, by trying to create jobs and and actually delivering on the promise of, hey, we are in this market, so let's do something for the market. And that's it. So this also comes from the fact that Xiaomi is run very autonomously in India. Like if you look at Xiaomi's employees compared to other Chinese companies, right? Like Xiaomi has very few Chinese employees. In the beginning, maybe it had a lot more, but over the last few years, it's most of the Chinese employees have gone back. And this is again, I think Hugo Barra, who was like the one of their head of international business, he had a key role in doing this. Trying to showcase Xiaomi as a global brand and not just a Chinese company. So interestingly, if you take Huawei, for example, Huawei is seen as a very clear Chinese company, right? Like, so a lot of, countries have nurture skepticism towards doing business with Huawei. I don't think that skepticism exists in the case of Xiaomi, because it, built the org structure in a way that, you operate independent geographies independently. So very interesting call there, maybe a lot of foresight.
And coming to the Galwan Valley clash, this was around June 2020. There was a lot of boycott, #boycott China sentiment, don't buy Chinese products, that kind of sentiment, at least on social media. Do you think that affected Xiaomi on the ground or in their sales? You did mention that they were a little scared. Anything else that actually translated into affecting sales or their relations with the government or anything of the sort?
Not really. Like in fact, Xiaomi did pretty well during COVID, and even its sales numbers are back. So what's happened is, because it was proactive in sort of anticipating the whole, there could be a crisis down the line, and because, in fact, this was probably from experience, because if you remember when Xiaomi launched in India, there was a news story which said that Xiaomi phones are not allowed to be used by army personnel because
Yes,
it's
you
a
mentioned
Chinese.
that in the book.
Yeah. So now they immediately sort of, figured that if you don't address this right now, like in a very serious way, this is gonna, come back and bite us later. So they, I think Manu Jain and, a whole lot of Xiaomi executives spent a lot of time in Delhi, working with government, getting the whole policy piece right, and getting in the good books of the administration. I think that was very thoughtful, as far as safeguarding the business was concerned. uh, of course, I don't think, in fact, none of Xiaomi's shops were attacked. The one thing that they did was they plastered all their stores with the Make in India, sticker and all of that, right? Like, but at the same time, if you look at, let's say, several other Chinese companies, they were actually attacked, like, they were vandalized, right? Like, yeah.
You mean smartphone companies?
Yeah, like the showrooms were attacked and all of that happened, right? After the Galwan clash and all of that. So I think that way Xiaomi has at least tried to showcase itself as like an Indian company, and it's working to a large extent. Of course, if things go really bad between the two countries, there's nothing anybody can do about it. Like, it will be like there will be like a lot of impact on trade, and this will be used as a lever, right? Like, just like how all the investments that are going into startups are being used as a lever, right? Like, so all of that will happen.
Lever by who?
So by both countries, right? Like, why did India ban all the, yeah, so so India banned all the, some 200 apps, right? Like, and said these don't comply with our security, this. So the thing is, these apps have been around for a while, but why then? Because you want to show that, hey, if you do this, there is an impact on how you do business in India. And I think that
there was one Xiaomi platform that was in the list as well.
I think so. I'm not sure though. Like,
Yeah, you were saying?
No, I was just saying that, so there is an impact on trade, and this is probably how you would show that, hey, let's maintain cordial relationship between the two countries, because trade is important, and which is how it's played out. Now in the US, for example, if you look at Huawei, right? Like, Huawei has been banned from a lot of major economies, like US, Australia, and that's a huge learning for Chinese companies, really, to not be too closely seen as a Chinese company, right? Like, uh, I think that's one of the things that Chinese companies will do as they globalize more and more, and they'll want to be seen as global brands. They'll use fans and people who are on the ground to build the businesses out, rather than doing a remote control business from HQ.
And another thing, while we talk about Make in India and Xiaomi, your book says that Xiaomi says they're 99% made in India or Make in India. But you say a more accurate version would be to say they source 65% of their components from India and they assemble in India. So is Xiaomi lying in a way?
No, I wouldn't say they're lying. Like, Xiaomi has been open about how much. In fact, the 65% sourcing, it comes from Xiaomi itself. So it's not like the company is lying. Xiaomi has been open about it. They say that 9900% of XYZ devices are made in India, which means they're assembled in India, which is fair. Like, it creates jobs, like it creates entry-level jobs, it gets them the benefit of production linked incentives, etc. But you can't source all the components from India, because India doesn't have those components. But as our ecosystem matures, as the government sort of makes these investments, so recently I was reading that the Indian government has said we'll encourage semiconductor manufacturing in India. So they've said we'll match funds for so we'll match funds if somebody is setting up a fab in India. So which means as the ecosystem matures, they will be able to procure more and more from Indian companies, and that's fair. Like, if you don't have it, you can't procure it, so you have to import it. and the simple fact is a mobile phone has like thousands of components in it. You cannot realistically, make everything in India. So, stuff will come from Taiwan, stuff will come from China, stuff will come from, all over the world. So that's just how global trade is done these days. So um, yeah, so I would say, it's definitely not lying, but and if I was in marketing Xiaomi and I was talking about Xiaomi, I would say the same things, like
Say the same things. What I mean, your marketing says it's made in India, but the reality is it's assembled in India, and about 65% of the components come from India. Which does that translate to made in India?
it's fair, like, so I wouldn't sort of say that, it's I would say if they're lying if they said, hey, we are making in India and all our devices are from India, but they are in fact importing everything from, let's say, another country, or let's say, and maybe repackaging it here. So the intent is very genuine, like, and the reason it's not to do good, or to be a good citizen, or all of that. It's basically what's good for business, and that's just the way it is, right? Like, you don't want to you don't have any benefits of doing, importing the device all from China and rebranding it here and selling it. So if you have incentives, why don't we make use of it? So, and that's fair, I feel.
JPK, what kind of components are sourced from India? As in, what part of the phone? Is it the cover, or what is it?
So I would say, things like the cover, the, battery packs, there are, some of these things like your PCB are not, I mean, the chipsets, they're not sourced from India. But, as like some of those advanced components are not sourced from India, everything else is from, India, I would say.
Got it. And moving on, another thing that you speak about in the book is how Xiaomi is called the copycat Apple. I've seen videos where Xiaomi is called the Apple of China. What's your honest opinion? Do you see Xiaomi as a copycat of Apple?
So these are very different companies. Reason being, Apple has a very top-down approach to design and, developing products. So for example, Apple will say, hey, this is the future of smartphone, and we've done like extensive research. We have Lockheed Martin, and we have like the Corning Gorilla Glass, this, that, and all of that. So Apple is a very top-down approach to design, and we have Johnny Ive, and we have like the world's best designers working for me. Xiaomi is a bottoms-up design company. Like, it'll say, hey, here are certain aesthetic values that we have, and within this, let the consumers tell us what to build. So it would say, to give you an example, the infrared blaster, which is used to control television. Basically that's how the TV remotes work, right? So there was a lot of demand from Indian consumers to build that into a Xiaomi device, and they did that. So whereas Apple will not approach design that way. Apple will say, hey, this is my definition of the new, the future of the phone, and this is what it is. Take it or leave it. Of course, they have like internal focus groups and all of that, like the whole design process. But what I'm trying to say is, Xiaomi is very participatory in the way it's built. So fans have a lot of say, especially in features. I suspect that Xiaomi will soon have a lot of features built for India, because India is one of their largest markets. There are devices being made for India, so IR Blaster is an example, but they will have like a much more wider sort of catalog which is focused on India.
All right.
This is the difference. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. No, this is the difference between Apple and Xiaomi. And look, I mean, if you were to look at the early days of a smartphone, a lot of them did look similar, like and you can't say one is copied from the other, because technology again is a global enterprise. No one can say ki, this device is purely American or purely Russian or purely Chinese. This whole piece comes together because science is a global enterprise, and the application of science is technology, which is again a global enterprise. So there are components, there are software which is being built by Chinese, Americans, Indians. In fact, we build a whole lot of software for everything pretty much. So it's a whole lot of it's a global enterprise. So you can't say this is Chinese, this is a copycat, or this is X company and this is a copycat. There are yeah.
Do you think Realme copies Xiaomi?
So by the same definition, no, right? Like they look very similar, but can you say copying is in its derogatory sense that it's used? Can you say, hey, these guys are a cheap knockoff or copying XYZ? I would say no. Like I would say because hey, it's not like Steve Jobs didn't copy components from other companies. The Mac OS was from Xerox, right? Like so the GUI was from Xerox Spark, right? Like so there's a lot of exchange which happens. So I wouldn't call it copying in the traditional sense. And also, it's not enough to just copy to be a successful company. Like in China there were 400 brands when Xiaomi was born. So what happened to all the 400 brands? Didn't they know how to copy? Like maybe I mean, obviously at least 50 of them knew how to copy. Like because they had this whole culture of building Shanzai phones, which is like all the fake brands that you had, right? Like the Crackberries and Nokais of the world, right? Like so they did have that culture, but it's not enough to just copy something blatantly. It doesn't work. Like you to build a sustainable long-term company, many things have to come together, right? So
yeah. So my final question about the book is, I read it, I couldn't find one negative thing about Xiaomi. Like, how come there is no negative criticism about how Xiaomi has operated their business? Do you find nothing wrong with what they did? I mean, you give possibilities. Like maybe this could happen. Maybe they will have stiff competition in China. Maybe the Realmes and Vivos might catch up. You give possibilities, but there are no weaknesses as such that you mention about Xiaomi.
Yes, and the reason being, I don't fundamentally believe that companies are good or bad or evil, and they have negative things to do, unless they're deliberately negative, right? Like there are maybe a few companies which have toxic work culture and all of that, like which nobody's trying to fix. I only believe that in the fact that companies are the coming together of many factors, and those factors can change. Like for example, if I said that in fact if you go back on the internet, you will find there was this analyst from Barron's who had written about Amazon, and it's called Amazon.bomb, and they say, and he said Amazon is but it's a pathetic company, it's never going to succeed because of XYZ reasons. Here's why I believe blah blah blah. The whole point is you cannot say that like about any company, to be honest. Like there are many. So Amazon, obviously, history proves that Amazon did extremely well, right? Like over the course of years. Take for example, if you go back and read about the internet itself, right? Like internet was called a new fad, like which will never last. You should read all the critics who said, in Forbes, in New York Times, this new thing is going to change the world, but it does nothing and all of that. And I've been in journalism long enough to know that, especially when it comes to technology, you cannot take a stand like that. Things change really fast. And all we can do is to probably sort of zoom out and say, these are the possibilities. Some of these things may or may not play out, so you just cannot predict the future. It's it's just the way it is. Like I've criticized Indian startups while I was covering, and I've seen them do extremely well, and I've looked back and said, hey, you know what, thank God I'm not being pulled up for that. And it's nothing. I think it's just changed my point of view as I have grown more and more, in tracking, as I've sort of grown as a journalist or as a writer, that there is no black and white. So it's very gray. Decisions are not yes or no. Sometimes it's argued really well. There are disagreements within companies. All of that is fair game in business, and we should make that sort of room for companies in that sense. Yeah, I mean, unless they're built on, let's say, I want to suck up all the data from the whole world, and one day I want to sort of um, delete all of it, right? So these are like the super villains in movies and all that. So then yes, you can have black and white. Even in movies nowadays, you don't have black and white characters. Like, they've changed, right? Like, the villain has a softer side, right? Like, the whole backstory. So back when we were kids, we used to watch Joker and we used to say, okay, this guy is pure evil. But now if you watch Joker, you'll be like, oh no, like, look at the whole sort of sentimental aspect. So I would say companies, you just can't say they're bad, evil, they do right or wrong. It's just coming together of many things, and it's just we just have to wait and see how it plays out.
How optimistic are you about Micromax and their made in India phones, or any Indian brand reclaiming the Indian market for smartphones?
It's difficult. It's difficult in the sense China still has a huge manufacturing sort of advantage. India has to, step up, and this is possible. And reason being, so if you look at, early days of companies like Nike, right? So they used to manufacture in Japan, or they used to buy, from companies like, Onitsuka, right? Like Tiger, right? Like, so they would buy from these Japanese companies and they would sell in the US. And this is how Nike was born. It was so then the yen crisis happened, like in the 70s. So American companies started looking for alternative manufacturing destinations. That's how Taiwan and China and all of these countries opened up. Now what's happening is Americans have a problem with China, like, and it's not going to go away very soon. So American companies, European companies, they will sort of open up the whole manufacturing ecosystem. They'll want to de-risk their piece. So I'm assuming, countries like India stand to benefit, through, good regulatory frameworks, policies that help, manufacturing. And we have a lot to gain in that sense. So if you look at it that way, if you play the long game, there will be many Indian companies which will succeed. Is it Micromax? I don't know. Like, is it going to be like, Carbon or Lava? I don't know. It could be, several Indian companies. Like the Tatas are getting into phone manufacturing at some point. Reliance has huge, sort of Geo phones are made a lot in China. They could look at shifting, a lot of that manufacturing to India, because now you have contract manufacturers, Foxconn, Viston, and all of that. So you could see a lot of Indian companies really building for India. And so it need not be like Micromax or, all of these guys. So it's a long, game. I think it's possible that, you will see a lot of Indian companies as well.
All right. So on that note, the real JPK, tell our viewers where they can buy a book and when they can buy, from when.
Okay, so from day after tomorrow, April 15th, it's on Amazon. You can order it. You can pre-order it now if you want, or you could go to therealjpk.com, which is my website. You can see some nice testimonials and all of that, and be tempted to buy the book. So you can, that's it.
Yeah. So on that note, to the real JPK, thank you so much for your time and congratulations on your book.
Thanks so much. This is my first book, so go ahead and hit that buy button, smash it.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Soft Cover. For The Print, this is Regina Mihindukulasuriya.